that what was Iraq is no more, and the actions of American leaders, perhaps no more than those from the current president, have sealed the fate of this once proud nation. Welcome into Midpoint, former State Department official, Deputy Special Envoy, and author of Smart Power Between Diplomacy and War, Christian Whiton joins us on the show. Christian, thank you so much for being here today.
Great to be here, thanks.
You wrote those words, the end of Iraq, in an article for the National Review Online, and I quote, "The detached, feckless U.S. response many now counsel for Iraq was first pioneered in Syria. The result, if that same course is taken now, will be worse." Is indeed serious Iraq done, or are we just sort of overstating things a little bit?
No, I think so. If you look at the three sort of sects within Iraq, the Kurds, the Shiites, the Sunnis, they are going their separate ways. Kurdistan is likely to become an independent country. No one really has the will to contain what is now Sunni Iraq. You'll see the Saudis, I think, try to influence it away from ISIS, but no one's going to push this back into Syria, this army back into Syria where it came from. And of course, then you have the Maliki government in Baghdad in what is essentially Shiite Iraq. So I think you do have a division of Iraq. And one thing that is abundantly clear is that the United States is led by President Obama, and the West just doesn't have the will anymore to enforce the status quo in Iraq that existed before this recent division.
Is it a matter of will, or is it a matter simply of intelligence? Because if indeed Iraq is done, there's nothing more that can be done to save this country. You can have all the wonderful will in the world, but if the country's done, what are we doing there?
Right, that's the problem. Why engage if we have no strategy? And there is no strategy here. Sending 300 guys to advise an army that's collapsing is, a Band-Aid. It's not really a strategy. I think it's important to, remember how we got here. At the end of the day, George W. Bush handed President Obama an Iraq that was becoming more secure, where civilian casualties had decreased massively, essentially an Iraq that was relatively peaceful, and that has fallen apart because of Obama's precipitous withdrawal. But right now, of course, at this point, we have to really focus now, I think, on how you shape this Sunni Iraq, how you might possibly divert it away from what has been declared now as a caliphate. And interestingly, this caliphate, this Sunni Iraq run by the terrorist group ISIS, should be of much greater concern to us than Afghanistan when it was run by the Taliban, because ISIS, more so than the Taliban, is very intent on exporting jihadism. In fact, just in the last 2 days, the leader, al-Baghdadi, calling on Muslims everywhere to rally to this new Islamic State and export global jihad.
Should we then, simply taking what you just said, should we then simply focus all of our attention not on saving Iraq, not on being any more involved than we are right now in basically protecting the people that are there, Americans that are there, but in focusing, if we do militarily do more, go right at ISIS, the heart of ISIS, bring our allies in, bring whoever it is, and say, Iraq's over here, here's what we need to do right now, because this will come back to bite us in another couple of years?
I think that's basically right. We've been left with a very bad situation, and I think it's important to remember that Obama foreign policy has done that. I don't think there's a case, really, a necessity for U.S. direct military intervention at this point, but especially working through Saudi Arabia, which I know is a mixed bag, but Saudi Arabia, which is going to be the benefactor of this Sunni version of Iraq, has an incentive to steer it away from ISIS. In fact, the Saudi king using the beginning of Ramadan to really criticize ISIS and criticize the extremism and the violence that ISIS is all about. So trying to deviate that away from Islamism, from terrorism, and trying to find if there are any left alive moderates in the Syrian civil war. I know these are all entanglements the U.S. wants to avoid, and it's understandable that there is fatigue over Middle East involvement. But really, again, a terrorist state coming together in the middle of the Middle East, already having access to something like $500 million in cash that has been looted from the cities they've conquered. It's really a danger to the United States and to our economy.
You said that the Saudis benefit from this. How exactly?
Well, not necessarily benefit. I think there's at the end of the day, I think a proxy war going on between Iran and Saudi Arabia here, and it's one where we have a stake. That basically, if you go back and look at the insurgency that occurred in Iraq before it was effectively defeated by the 2007 surge of forces, basically it was a proxy war in many ways between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran backing Shiite terrorists, insurgents, if you will, and Saudi Arabia backing others, including others that became partners of the United States, who were called later the Sons of Iraq, the Anbar Awakening. Those were Sunnis who we convinced basically to come in from the cold, to cease their violence, based on the promise that we would also suppress Shiite terrorists as well. All that fell apart, but Saudi Arabia still is not going to stand by and watch Maliki, backed by Iran, drop bombs on the Sunni population of Iraq. And this insurgency is likely to heat up. You're going to see violence in Baghdad. You're going to see violence spread across the country. So Saudi will be involved. Saudi doesn't always make the best choices. So this is a case where, you know, if we could sit down, if we could reinvigorate our alliances that have atrophied over the last 6 years, that we could try and bias things in the right direction without sending U.S. troops. But these are all big ifs. And unfortunately, the White House seems focused on doing something else, which is trying to get Maliki at this point to reconcile with various groups within Iraq. I mean, he failed to do that in the first 6 or so years of his administration. It's extremely unlikely that's going to happen now that the shooting has begun.
Speaking of those U.S. troops, I want you and our audience to listen to something that the president said within the last couple of weeks regarding combat troops in Iraq.
I think we always have to guard against mission creep. So let me repeat what I've said in the past. American combat troops are not going to be fighting in Iraq again.
You believe him, or is he just basically spitting out a pipe dream?
You know, I don't think we'll see the involvement that we did in the last decade, but he's technically wrong because he's already sent, first of all, more than 300 advisors. We are now on the hook to defend the Baghdad airport, which you will better believe will at some point come under insurgent attack. In fact, there are often minor attacks on that facility when there is violence around Baghdad. You know, I think the bigger issue is not so much mission creep, but the lack of a mission. This belief that goes back to Obama's inaugural that we can have some sort of ill-defined partnership with Iran and that'll help us out in Iraq. We need to understand, I think, what drives problems in the Middle East. It is this Islamist political ideology, the unification of mosque and state, the export of Sharia and jihadism, and ISIS is the #1 sort of proponent of that, battling to push aside al-Qaeda and al-Qaeda's leadership for the mantle of who is going to be the chief proponent of Islamism. And until we sort of get it through our heads that that is something we need to combat through smart political warfare, through diplomacy, and at times through the force of arms, you know, it's really, we really just don't have a strategy in this war. I
got about 1:30 left. Let's talking about driving problems here for just a moment. Is it not fair to say that the biggest problem we're dealing with here, some people believe that the best option for Iraq is to break this country up into 3 divisions. The Shiites in Baghdad in the south, the Sunnis in the north, and the semi-autonomous Kurds in the northeast. We're talking about breaking this country up as the best possible option. I'm not a military leader, I only play one on TV from time to time, but that seems to me like a fraught with disaster plan that has absolutely no chance of succeeding.
Well, it will be disastrous, and that is why previous U.S. administrations and, frankly, allies in the West and the Middle East wanted Iraq held together, even though you do have those 3 sects that don't necessarily get along, the Kurds, the Shiites, the Sunnis. The reason being, if you divide Iraq, then Iran gets an advantage. It has very strong control, will have strong control, in fact, already does in some respects, over the Shiite part of Iraq, which is the southern part, includes increasingly Baghdad, which has become more Shiite since the 2003 invasion. And then, of course, you have the Sunnis who then, you know, take on a nationalist tone, and you have the makings of a proxy war. This is the reason why those much defamed and much criticized borders in the Middle East nonetheless are ones that the West has tried to preserve. This isn't some imperialist game, because as you point out, when you redraw those lines, thousands and potentially hundreds of thousands of people died. Look at the partition of India, 1947, into Pakistan and India. This wasn't some neat, orderly process where Muslims go in one direction and Hindus another go in another. thousands and thousands of people died, lives uprooted. So, you know, we're going to see, I think, just a spiraling of violence in Baghdad, in Iraq. It's very unfortunate, and it will affect us, not just in the fact that you have Westerners involved in this fight, that Americans may be targeted, that jihadis may show up here in North America, but also in the price of oil, which, you know, people deride wars for oil, but energy
you're
is
right
very
there.
important
Unfortunately,
to our
we're out
economy,
of
and I
time,
think we're going to see those prices climb.
You're right there on oil. Again, the book, Smart Power Between Diplomacy and War. Christian Whiton, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Great to be here.